Hey there, I'm Kevin Fontenot, and I'm here with Scott Magdalene, and together we're your host of the podcast where we're talking about all things related to church leadership, training, and discipleship. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that's on every pastor's mind. That's leadership development. I know for me, as a former small groups pastor and in my current role where I help co-lead the small groups ministry at my church, is something that's always on my mind. And Scott, you had an interesting thought the other day related to leadership development and kind of the biblical perspective of it. And I'd love to hear more of those thoughts and what you're thinking related to that.
Yeah, I had kind of the this wild hair as like rant and Slack. It was like the rant was so bad that Jared had to like bow out of the channel because he was like, "Sorry, too distracting, too much. I gotta focus." So
And Jared's our director of engineering, and we've got a lot on his plate right now.
we do. We keep him pretty full, pretty busy, and so I let him bow out, and I said sorry for the rant, or whatever. But anyway, here's the gist of my thoughts the other day on Slack. It was this. So we have this generally this idea where we can build leaders as they lead, and I think that's okay. I think that's not an anti-biblical or an unbiblical perspective on leadership development, but I also think it's really dangerous to be throwing people into leadership roles before we've verified or validated some other things, some other really important aspects. So what I was brainstorming was kind of a model for leadership development that starts with discipleship and moves toward leadership. And leadership is at the core of like the end of the path, not like throwing them in and then hoping that they develop as a leader on the way. So it's 4 parts. I like frameworks. I'm a systems guy. I try not to be too systematized when it comes to leading ministry because it really should be, I'm not saying that the Spirit can't lead in systems, but it shouldn't be just so rigid. Anyways, but here's my 4 steps, right? I'm a pastor. I got 4 steps. First starts with learn. So somebody becomes a Christian. They're growing as a disciple. They need to be learning. I know there's kind of a pushback against learning the Bible maybe in the last couple of decades, but I think it's really important to learn the Bible, understand the Bible, have a good grasp of Bible concepts and Bible themes. I think that provides a spiritual foundation that everything else can be built upon. So you can call it learning or just being in disciple mode, being discipled as a start. And a lot of people come into a church or they've been a disciple for a long time. And so this isn't necessarily a step where everybody has to start from like how to read the Bible. But I think that's something that people need to have before they can start moving toward leadership roles, is having the foundations of being a disciple of Christ. Next.
If only there was a tool that let you kind of gauge where people are at in their spiritual journeys.
Right. I know. Right. We've been trying to think of something. I mean, like I was thinking maybe like a survey tool, something that's really smooth and like, automated almost.
Yeah. Maybe something that you could call like disciple labs or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Right. That's honestly something I'm really excited about, by the way, from a ministry, like equipping ministers. It's something really unique. But so starting with learning, moving on to modeling. So like, are they not just learning, but are they modeling what they've learned? Are they living out their faith? Are they walking, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk and walking behind Jesus? So seeing that they're learning and modeling, and then are they starting to disciple others? So before they become a leader of ministry programs or starting to lead in an organizational sense, are they the type of person who is naturally already pouring into other people's lives? So do they have a mentee? Are they a mentor? Or do they come alongside others to counsel them when they're going through troubles? Do they have that mindset of being a disciple maker first? Because to me, those 3 pieces, learning, modeling it, and then also discipling others, is really important, foundational to be able to be a leader in a ministry context. To me, just having leadership skills or personality or the capacity to lead large teams isn't enough to be a qualified leader in a ministry. So those 3 things start first, and then we start into the leadership development or the leadership or giving them leadership responsibility. And then if necessary, honing leadership skills once the spiritual side has been, that spiritual foundation has been set. That was kind of the gist of my rant in Slack, but that's kind of how I feel why I would like to see leadership development go.
I think that's so important, in Acts when we see the Hellenist Jews rising up and, coming to the apostles saying, hey, our widows are getting left out of the daily distribution. What are you guys going to do about it? And they're like, we're busy teaching. We got all this on our plate already. We're trying to make sure that the gospel's going forth. And they say, choose among yourself men that are full of faith, full of the Holy Spirit, and they'll be the ones that oversee this program. And so even in the biblical times in the book of Acts, we see that happening where the apostles are like, find the people that are discipled already, the ones that are already full of faith, the ones that are already doing these things, and then we'll have them serve. And so I think that's a really good biblical perspective because that's what we see in the Bible.
Yeah, I know. I didn't even come up with it.
Those are always the best ideas, the ones that we actually don't have to come up
That feel profound, and then you realize, oh, I'm totally not the first person to think of that.
Yeah, I totally read that in Acts 3 years ago, but just now thinking of it in my actual ministry. Cool. So one of our favorite verses, collectively, we have equipped the saints on my shirt here and on Scott's hat is Ephesians 4:12 through 14, where Paul's writing to the church in Ephesus. And he says, he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry to build up the body of Christ. And this is something I have an answer for, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on why you're so passionate about this verse in particular, Scott.
Well, this verse has been on my mind ever since long before I launched Trained Up. But the idea behind this, it feels like a pivot point for in not necessarily just like the New Testament, but in the context of how the Bible talks about leaders in the church, and then how Paul is talking about being a church leader in a local context. So to me, this is a pivot point because it moves from being a good influence, preaching the gospel, and like purely spiritual, like I'm doing the work of ministry, to where Paul is saying, like, just doing the work of ministry is not the only focus of what people who are called to ministry, preachers of the ministry, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists should be doing. Those people should be equipping all of the saints. So all of the people who are following Christ, all of those people should be doing ministry. And the work of apostles, prophets, evangelists, and pastors and teachers should be to equip those people to do the work of ministry. So even harkening back to that situation where the first deacons came together to serve the widows and to serve their community, like that idea was like a raw, honestly a spirit-led kind of a Band-Aid on the problem, but it kind of laid the foundation for what Paul is talking about here, where like the pastors and teachers need to be doing ministry, but not to be the only ones doing ministry. And so as a tool, pastors need to be extending or multiplying or expanding their own leadership by equipping others to do the work of ministry.
Yeah, that's so good. For me, I think our primary calling as ministry leaders is to make disciples. We all have primary callings and we have secondary callings, and that primary calling for every single one of us is to go out and make disciples. There may be secondary callings where the Lord's really laid something on your heart to go out and do, but our first step is always to go out and raise up others. And, kind of like your 4 steps, I think there are 3 different types of people in the church. There are doers, there are equippers, and there are multipliers. And most of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, we're doers. We know how to do ministry well. We know how to, figure out the to-do list, go out there and do what needs to be done. But few of us are really good at equipping others or even multiplying. So equippers are the ones that go out and see the ministry needs, and their first step, instead of saying, oh, I can do that really quick, it'll take me 5 minutes, but instead maybe spend 30 minutes equipping someone else to go out and figure out how to do that instead. And then the multipliers are raising up equippers that then go out to equip other people. So it's kind of that cycle of discipleship where you're raising up others who are full of faith. They can go out and do the things, and then they're like Stephen, who then branch out of that and go and share the gospel more, and they're raising up other people underneath them. And that's such a primary thing that we have to do as believers, as Christians, as ministry leaders. We have to be equipping others, because if we're not equipping others, we're ultimately going to die out. The mission, the vision of what we truly believe in, what our church stands for, if we're not doing those things, we're not going to see multiplication. That's why we see so much stagnation in our churches today, because we're not actually raising up disciples. We're not actually raising up volunteers. And this is my soapbox. I could rant forever on this one.
I'm about to stand up out of my pew over here.
That'll just make me go longer, because I am the AG Pentecostal one on the conversation. So you start getting the hanky out or waving or shouting, and I'm just going to keep going.
Awesome. Yeah, I was having a conversation with a young student minister. I say young, like I'm 33 now. He feels young, but he's like mid-20s. Anyway, I was having a conversation with a student minister yesterday, and he's passionate, been in student ministry for a little while and loves it, but realizes his own capacity for ministry he's become the lid on his own ministry. And he said, man, I want to confess, like, straight up, I'm a great doer of ministry. Like I work hard. I don't take breaks really. I do my best to stay healthy. I spend time with family, but I work hard at it. He said, but I've reached my maximum of what I can do. He said, I feel like I should be like helping others to do ministry, but I don't know where to start with it. I don't know how to get going. And so we talked about Ephesians 4:12, and we talked about the biblical nature. It's not just a strategy of ministry. It's literally the command that we're called to do as ministry leaders, is to equip others to do ministry. And so we talked through his holy discontent that he was feeling. I said, well, that's a Holy Spirit draw for you, not just like a, man, I need to be more efficient as a ministry leader. And so we talked through like how to like identify the right people in his ministry, or people that are not in his ministry, who can he kind of bring into his ministry, people who are bought in, maybe not people who are necessarily currently leaders in his ministry right now, but people who are committed. How to identify those people, bring them in, how to work with them to develop a strategy to develop them into people who can do ministry. And then also like how to develop a strategy where they know what to do and they have the skills to do it. And so of course we talked in the context of how Trained Up fits in, like the skills training. But we talked much more about how do you find the right people, how do you like identify those people, and how do you kind of build a system for what they should be doing so that you can, you know, train them on the skills to get it done. But that's a great like example of somebody, of the Holy Spirit seeing somebody, the Holy Spirit taking somebody who is a doer of ministry and moving them toward being a discipler, or somebody who equips others, or equipper of ministry. Hopefully one day that guy will be, 40 years old and he'll be a multiplier of leaders or whatever. But his next step is being an equipper.
Yeah, and that's so important. One of my favorite books that I've read, and we're actually taking all of our small group leaders through it right now, is a book called Ready, Set, Grow by Scott Wilson, who's a senior pastor of a church called the Oaks in the South Dallas area. And they were at a point where they kept hitting a plateau. They would hit a certain point and then they would die back down, and realize that they just couldn't get past that point. And, they took an honest evaluation of themselves and just realized that they were all doers. They wanted to say they were equippers and multipliers. And yeah, there were some people that were outside of that, like their kids pastor, was really great at multiplying people, because that's kind of the nature of kids ministry. You always have to be raising up people, because they don't seem to last very long when it comes to volunteers in kids ministry. But then they kept going at it. They basically took a 3-year look at themselves and figured out how to move all of their staff members from doers to multipliers. And, at the end of that, they're a church of several thousand now, where they were a church of 500 at the time. And it's just amazing to see what happens when we can actually get honest with ourselves and try and figure out those next steps for us. And so I'd like to kind of shift a little bit and talk about what those next steps look like for pastors and ministry leaders that are listening to this, because it's easy to say that we all need leadership development. It's easy to, listen to a podcast, say, yes, I'm passionate about leadership development, I'm going to go implement in my ministry. And, we try and do something, we read a couple books, and we just never actually get that DNA out there. And so for me, I have some thoughts on this, and then Scott, I'd love for you to chime in afterwards. For me, it all starts with that mission and vision. I'm a big mission and vision guy, and, that's going to be the first thing that I always turn toward when I'm trying to implement something new. I want to start with that why. Why do we actually want to do this? And that's really important for you to define for yourself as a ministry leader, because if you don't define that, it's going to be really hard to get people on board with what you're trying to do. But if they know why you're passionate about it, know the mission, the vision, about the reason that you're wanting to implement a leadership development program, it becomes a lot easier for them to buy into what you're telling them that you want to do. Because usually when we're implementing these new things, we're requiring more of people, and people don't always take kindly for us asking more of them, especially when they're volunteers or they're not paid and they're just doing this in their free time. They already have a lot on their plate. So us asking more of them becomes a real burden, and sometimes if they're not truly bought into that mission and vision. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also really important that after you define that personal mission, vision, the why you want to do that, to start talking with your team early on. I'm a big believer in getting your team involved as early as possible, because while you're trying to scope out what that looks like and what that program looks like, your team members are there and they probably have some insight that you're not thinking about. Because if you're thinking about it as a full-time pastor, someone that's working 40 hours a week at the church and then another 10 hours a week at home and one-on-ones and things like that, it becomes really difficult to see what that looks like for the average person. And so roping in the people that are underneath you, that are already faithful, that are serving in your ministry, and getting them involved in that process makes that leadership development program a lot easier, because you can get a bigger and broader perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that development of the mission and vision as language for your church to kind of rally behind is really important. And like you said, bringing in people who are not just staff people, and bringing in
Right.
people who are committed, but not necessarily like, thinking 24/7 about how to build a church. That's really important for a couple of reasons, because we tend, as ministry leaders, we tend to overthink and over spiritualize some things sometimes. And also because like we don't carry, as ministry leaders, we don't carry all of the language of our people. And so we need to bring in perspectives, if you want to call it diversity, or just bringing in multiple perspectives from different generations and different cultural backgrounds in our church. It's really important to bring those perspectives in, because it really influences the language. And if the language of a mission and vision doesn't reflect the language that people use, people won't speak the mission and vision. And it's really, I mean, it's vital. It's beyond really important. It is absolutely vital that your mission and vision is speakable by your people. And so I say that because it's kind of going with a generic, we'd exist to make disciples, or help fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ kind of stuff is good. It's fine. So big churches, use that kind of language, and it's really fine. But churches that are generally in a cultural context that is more unique than just kind of that homogenous white suburban culture. Not saying that's a bad thing, but those churches that are a little bit more in a mixed cultural setting, they need that cultural language to be kind of infused into the mission and vision. So a good example is my church. I'll use my church. I really love the statement, the missional mandate, if you will, at our church. It's that the district church exists to make disciples by interrupting people's lives with love, because the gospel changes everything. And so there's a few pieces of that. Of course, it's the make disciples. Every church should have that, not necessarily that language, but at least that piece of we exist to make disciples. What's unique about this one is that there's a piece of proactive servanthood. So there's the interrupting people's lives with love. And so it kind of frames how the district church looks at serving their community. It's proactive. We go out and interrupt. We like knock on your door and say, how can we serve you? We don't wait for you to come to us and with a benevolence, request. It's, we're going to go to your house, literally interrupt you, and try to love you. And so that's a kind of a perspective. And of course it uses the language of the community, that interrupting lives with love. And then the last piece is the gospel changes everything. It's a very gospel centered, gospel motivated church. And I know that every church is motivated by the gospel, but they like to speak that phrase that the gospel changes everything. So that language really motivates and energizes and brings our church to move whenever it's used. And it's honestly, it's one of those things where most of the church knows it. We use it every single Sunday on Sunday mornings. Usually it's an opening and a closing, but at least it's an opening. And it's in all of the literature, and it's in all of the staff have it as their signatures. And that may feel like redundant. It may feel like it's overkill. Like, man, people are going to get tired of this phrase, but you kind of want them to, because you want that phrase to be so ingrained in their head that when someone thinks of the district church, they think of interrupting people's lives with love, because the gospel changes everything. And
that's such a key thing to do.
It is, yeah. So that communication, constant communication, once you have a phrasing that resonates with your people, you actually have to put it in front of your people so that it continues to resonate.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, if it's not the language of what your people are actually saying, in a lot of churches, they have these, dedicated mission and vision statements. But then if you actually ask their people, what's the mission of this church, they're going to give you a different answer. And some of those answers are the exact same, where you ask 10 people in the church, hey, what's the mission of this church? And they'll give you that answer, but it's nowhere near the mission statement of the church itself. And probably if people are already talking about a mission statement and it's a good answer, you should probably go with the language they're already talking about it in.
That's funny. That's probably another good example of where a ministry survey could help to survey your people and understand with the language that they use to describe why they participate, or they feel like they're a part of this particular church. A ministry survey could help there as well. And also, yeah, most mission and vision statements are like printed on a piece of paper. Sometimes they're framed, put in a foyer, and then nobody talks about them anymore, and they go back to their life as usual. But a true mission and vision statement, or a mission and vision language, would be something that is used on a regular basis in the life of the conversations of the church, and is infused into the language of the church.
Yeah. And if you're looking for those surveys that Scott's kind of alluding to a little bit, we actually published a blog over at trainedup.church/blog, where you can actually download the surveys. They're free to use, set up in Google Sheet, where you can send them out to your team members to kind of see how they're already thinking about your ministry, why they're serving. And it's really helpful when you're developing that mission and vision.
Okay. So just as an aside for your own notes, we're going to be definitely doing an episode, or maybe multiple episodes in the future, about ministry surveys as a really useful tool that just nobody is doing well or doing enough of. But that's just an aside. Ministry surveys is a big topic that we're going to be talking about.
Awesome. So we got the mission and vision down. We got our teams kind of motivated by the mission and vision. What's that next step after there, Scott, if you're leading a church or a ministry team?
Yeah. So if you've established that and you started to infuse that language into your congregation, into your every Sunday, into every email signature and everything, next step after that is to build ministry structure that exemplifies or maybe it puts that that mission and vision into action. Like I said, with the district church example, interrupting people's lives with love is that kind of core statement in the middle there. And so we build ministry systems or ministry strategy around interrupting people's lives with love. So we have to actually put it into practice. We don't want it to be just words that sound good or sound flowery. We want that our mission and vision to be lived out in how we actually lead our church. So that's how we do it. Gotcha.
So you establish that mission and vision around what you actually want to do, and then you just do it.
You just do it. Simple as that, right? Yeah. Yeah. Some mission and vision stuff is actual. We are just using clear language to state what we do and what we care about. And some is aspirational. Some churches need to be more active in their community, or maybe they need to be more evangelistic, or they need to be more caring for their own church. Whatever it is, the thing that they need to be doing more of, and maybe that mission and vision reflects what they aspire to be. And so that drives them to be doing something they should be doing, that they're not doing it naturally. But in any case, the vision should be reflecting what you're doing, or at least pushing you to do it. So,
yeah, no, that's so good, and such a key point that we have to remember. And when we're talking about leadership development and thinking through this and what it looks like in your specific ministry context, in your specific church, the biggest thing is you can't just commit to this for a week or a month or 2 months. This has to be something that you're committed to and dedicated to. Because we just try and do this as a simple program that we try and implement quickly and hope everyone's going to come on board with it, that's just not going to happen. Dedicating some time and resources to really nail down that mission and vision, to roll it out to your church, that's that first step there. And then you have to constantly revisit it. You have to say, are we actually doing these things? How are people still talking about it? If it's 6 months down the road, what changes have we made in these 6 months that are really effective? What hasn't worked? What has worked? And just be in that culture of constantly evaluating what's going on, not so that we can, get down on ourselves or be frustrated that we're not doing as much as we can, but so that we actually know what's going on, so that we can take an honest look, that self-evaluation of, hey, we've done these things great, we haven't done these things so great, what's that next step that we're going to take? And I think one of the biggest things with leadership development is knowing that you're not going to get it exactly right the first time. It's going to be a system that's going to evolve over time. You're going to make changes, you're going to make little tweaks here and there, and that's a good thing, because if it stays the same from decades and decades and decades, people are going to leave the church. They're not going to be committed to the mission and vision because it's stayed the same.
Building flexibility into systems and having a mindset of flexibility, having a systems mindset, but having flexibility in your systems is like the topic of an entire podcast episode, because systems that aren't flexible are dead systems. 6 months from now, just like you said, 6 months from now, if our leadership development flow is not working, but we continue to do it because that's the system that we use, then you're headed for death.
Yeah, awesome. And we got a ton of resources to help people with developing this kind of leadership pipeline and leadership development framework. With Trained Up, we have a lot of content around that built directly into our tool.
Actually, I'm so excited. Can I do a little shout out? I'm working on something right now with a friend of mine who's in the leadership development world as a professional in it, and it's we're kind of building in Trained Up you already used the word framework. I'm gonna use the word framework again, like a framework inside of Trained Up where it's kind of, it's turnkey. You open up Trained Up and it's ready to go. You have training at every level of the leadership pipeline. You have kind of templates that are almost completely done for you. All you have to do is just do your own training for things like vision and mission and history of the church and, leadership culture stuff for your church. And then there's going to be course templates for book reading. So as you're reading through books with your team, because video is not the only way to learn, there's lots of awesome leadership books out there. But as you're reading through leadership books with your team, you'll be able to use Trained Up to keep track of everyone's progress, prompt discussion, all that kind of stuff. I'm really excited about that piece that's coming soon in this world of leadership development.
Sounds super valuable.
Good. I'm working hard on it.
I'm inspired to get started. Where do I sign up? Awesome. Well, that's going to be it for us today on the podcast. If you want to chat more with us about leadership development, head over to trainedup.church/blog, and you can read all the show notes about this episode, and you can actually start a chat directly with us on the page. So we don't want to just have this conversation as between me and Scott about leadership development. We want to invite you guys into the conversation. So if you head to trainedup.church/blog, you guys can start a chat with us right there. We'll answer it. We'll talk back and forth with you. And I don't know of any other podcast that really lets you have that kind of access.
Heck no, dude. Like, we legitimately love talking with pastors, like, and so much, in fact, that we probably spend half of our day chatting with pastors. Like, all day long, pastors are coming on our website, chatting us with questions about Trained Up, about how to do ministry, how about recruiting volunteers, about how to implement training. Like I said, I was on a call yesterday for almost an hour with a guy talking about leadership development.
Yeah.
We love talking with pastors. I don't know how many blogs. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever been to a blog where instead of like just leaving a comment, you can actually literally chat with the author of the blog or chat with the team behind the company right there on the blog. That's how much we love chatting and talking with pastors.
Yeah, absolutely. So go to trainedup.church/blog, read some of the free resources that we have available, check out those ministry surveys, check out the show notes for this episode there, and start a conversation with us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have a conversation with you. And it's not just going to be just something simple where we say, hey, that's great. Keep doing good stuff. We want to have the actual conversation where it's back and forth. So head to trainedup.church/blog, and we'll see you guys next time.